Please be seated. Happy New Year. Some people kind of caught on that. September 1st in the Orthodox Church is the beginning of the church year. So I know it's a little bit lighthearted to say Happy New Year. But from the vantage point of the church, a new year has started. This is a little different than churches in the West, liturgical churches in the West. They start their new year with Advent, and they count 4 Sundays back from Christmas. And so, that's like our Catholic friends, our Lutheran friends, our Anglican friends. They look at their church new year starting late November, early December. And their focus is the anticipation of the birth of our Lord. For us, in looking at today, September 1st, as the church new year, the focus that we have is a little bit different from that. There are a few different items that are mentioned. There's a thing in the bulletin about the new year and things that are special about the month of September. They tend to point more towards Old Testament things, and they tend to point more towards things about anticipating the coming of the Messiah. And we see this in our gospel reading. Now, what is special about this gospel reading is it is prescribed for September 1st, the New Year day for the church. So we read it every year on September 1st. But depending upon what day of the week September 1st falls on, we may or may not hear that, because it's not always on a Sunday. Because today is September 1st, the church new year, it basically supersedes whatever Sunday reading we would typically have on a Sunday. We would probably be continuing these readings from the Gospel of Matthew, but we're not. Well, what's the context of this reading that we hear? Jesus goes to a synagogue, opens a scroll, and reads from Isaiah. This reading occurs in the Gospel of Luke near the beginning of the Gospel. So if we look at the events of the Gospel leading up to this particular story, there are a few things that stand out. Jesus has been baptized in the River Jordan by John. We have that on our icon over here. He's gone into the wilderness and has been tempted by Satan for 40 days. He has returned to the world. He has started his message of repent. And he has started to perform healings, those miracles of mercy. And then we come to this story where he comes to Nazareth. This account is only given in the Gospel of St. Luke. It's the Sabbath day. He comes to the synagogue, and he comes to read from one of the scrolls. And we hear what he is reading here. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor and heal the brokenhearted. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. Spiritually, at this time in the life of the people of Israel, the Jews, it was a time when they were downtrodden, both politically and socially and spiritually. They were occupied by the Roman army and subject to their decrees and direction. They weren't free to govern themselves. And their religious leaders basically put on a good show, but were essentially concerned with themselves. There was not a lot of spiritual care for the Jewish people at that time. So it was a time ripe for the coming of the Messiah. And what we hear in Isaiah is essentially the indicators of who the Messiah would be. We hear later in the Gospels, when John has been in prison, he sent some of his disciples to Jesus and asks, "Are you the one we've been waiting for?" And his response is to point to Isaiah. Well, the blind receive sight, the poor are taken care of, the oppressed are liberated, all those sorts of things. So he's pointing to all of this as he's doing this reading. The difficulty is that he's doing this reading in his hometown synagogue. These people have watched him grow up. He's the carpenter's son. And there is that sense. Familiarity breeds contempt. So at the very end, after he sat down and everyone's staring at him, he says, well, today you've seen that fulfilled in the reading. So what Jesus is doing in this story is announcing, I am beginning my public ministry as the Messiah. He continues forth from here, and we get into all of the stories that follow. The calling of the first disciples. That's a reading we'll hear in a few weeks. Going here and there. More healings. More teachings. And it continues for 3 more years. He's saying in this synagogue in his hometown, I'm starting now. What we don't hear in this reading, it kind of ends in this odd place. It says that the people were kind of like, hey, this is impressive. We kind of like what he said here. But it very quickly devolves. And we hear that as they leave the synagogue, they take him to a cliff to push him off. It's this first instance we have of people hearing the message that he is giving. And they're saying, well, we can't have that. We need to get rid of you. And miraculously, it says Jesus just walks through the crowd and leaves. They're not able to do it. If you read carefully in the Gospels, past this point, there's no mention of Nazareth in terms of Jesus going there. He's kind of done there. He's kind of announced what he's doing, and he's left home. If anything, the focal point for his public ministry is the city on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee, Capernaum. We hear Capernaum all the time in these gospel readings. And it's there. So Jesus Christ, in this announcement, has said, we're done with the old, and it's time for the new. And that really is the spirit that we have with the Church New Year. I know we tend to get this somewhat the secular New Year, January 1st. There are all these conversations about making resolutions. I lost the word for a moment. Making resolutions about how the coming year will be different. And seeing what we can do with that. In the church, we're being told it's a new beginning. We can leave last year behind, and we can move ahead into the new year. A memory I have. We've been in this building now a little over 5 years. When we first came into this building, of course, the Protestant group that was in here, very much involved with audiovisual sorts of things. So where the back windows are over on this side, they have a platform set up with the soundboard, the mixing board and all of that. And on the front of it, they have this phrase written on there. It's kind of their motto for where the church was. A place of new beginnings and second chances. And that's the theme that we have on this particular New Year. We may not feel that great about our participation in the life of the church. Year's over, New Year's starting. We can regroup and resolve to do better in terms of our participation in the life of the church. I've shared with a few people one of the interesting things about the Church New Year and the rhythm of the parish is it very much follows the rhythm of the school year. All of our families here with children, think of that. School's started. You kind of finished up your summer vacations and you've started all of these things that will continue on through May. And in general, that's our trajectory in the church year too. We've begun this new year. All of these things will be happening in the life of the church through the fall. Of course, we'll have Christmas, we'll have Theophany, we'll get to Great Lent, we'll get to Holy Week, and we'll get to Pascha. And that'll land us about April, May. And of course, course, kind of the wind down. This is something that we all do. Once we get past Memorial Day, we kind of disappear. When we get to Labor Day, many of us are still disappeared. Thank you for coming to church this morning, because it's a holiday weekend. But we kind of regroup after that. Or that Memorial Day to Labor Day window where we're elsewhere, or our thoughts are elsewhere. What about this regrouping for the new year? And how can we approach that in the life of the church? I'm going to do something very, very nitty-gritty and practical here. There are two things that I do every August. One is because I'm a parent, and one is because, well, I'm the priest of this parish, and it's kind of my job. Advice I offer, basically to families. Have a family calendar. Have it digital and put everything on that for every member of your family. I especially do this with like young couples getting married. You're two separate people. You're starting a household. Have one family calendar and put everything on it. And each spouse is responsible for the calendar. And the calendar is sacred. Do not turn this into the thing where your spouse is the administrative assistant responsible for running the calendar. You participate as well, and you run it together. So our family has had that for over a decade. So the thing that I do every August is I sit down with all of the calendars of the school year, and I put everything on there for the school year. And this year it's a little bit more complicated because we have work schedule, someone in community college, someone who's going to school at two different high schools, and is taking a community college class. So there's a lot of people in a lot of different places. But today I can look at that calendar and I know where someone needs to be on any given day between now and the end of May. I know when he was graduating from high school. That's on the calendar. It's all there. And it's necessary to keep a family running. And it includes a level of less stress by having it all put there. Now I'll talk about the priest part. As I've been saying, we have a church new year. September is the beginning of the church year. So every August I sit down and I look at the schedule of the church through to the following August. And everything that I know of is scheduled there. Every feast day, every parish council meeting, when we do and don't have church school, any times that we don't have Vespers on Saturday, because that happens occasionally. When does Lent start? When is Holy Week? What are the services that week? And Pascha. It's all there. This is an online calendar that has been on the parish website. I don't talk about this enough. I've been doing this for over a decade. If you want to know what's happening in the life of the church, go on the parish website and look at the calendar. It's there through next August. And as things happen in the life of the church, oh, we have to cancel this event, oh, we have to change the time of this event, oh, we have to add this thing, that's done in real time. So that calendar is the reference point for everything else that we have in the church. So the announcements that I email, that comes from the calendar. The announcements in the bulletin, that comes from usually the email. But it all trickles down. The focus for the bulletin is a couple of weeks. The email announcement you get basically a month, and the long term is 3 months. If you want to know what's happening for the entire year, go on the parish website. Okay, Father. That's kind of nice administrative, what have you. What does that have to do with this conversation about the new year? Part of why I put that out there is I know that some families are in different places in terms of how they schedule their participation in the life of the church. I know it can go from waking up on Sunday morning and do I go to church today or not, and remind me what time does liturgy start. That can be one. All the way to, I want to make sure that I come to things that are important to me and that I've done year after after year, and when is that? My memory's not that great. So along with this idea of a family calendar, just to manage all of the other stuff, and looking at the priorities, we give priority to school, as we're legally required to educate our children. We give priority to doctor's appointments because we give priority to our health, and of course it costs money and all those sorts of things. If we give priority to God, the most tangible way of addressing that is scheduling it, putting it on our calendar. So what I would encourage you to do, because it's all there and it's all current, take a little time in the next week or so and look at that and put it on your calendar. Which feast day liturgies am I going to try to come to during the week? Put it on your calendar. When does Great Lent start? And I want to make sure that I come to Forgiveness Vespers. Put that on your calendar. Which Lenten services that we should all be participating in on some level during Great Lent am I planning on doing this year? Put it on your calendar. I have to put in here, my poor family has to deal with the occupational hazard of me running the church calendar. It's a Google calendar, so you can subscribe to it. So if you want to go to that extent, you can just subscribe to it and see everything happening all the time in the church. So in our family calendar, it comes up all the time. Of course, the conversation is, well, these are things that I'm responsible to go to as the priest, but what can we participate in as a family? And how that may or may not work. So you have that option there. And I offer that as an encouragement. If you know what's out there and when it's happening, you can have a conversation in your family about participating in that. And then committing to that on your calendar. So I offer that as one way of approaching. New beginning. The prior year, we're done. But we can move ahead here. So, glory to Jesus Christ.